I'm here at Adam Henson's farm in the Cotswolds to talk about his new rural mental health podcast, Keeping on Track. It's about connecting with farmers, getting them to share how they're feeling, but also connecting with that wider general public, ensuring that they know where their food comes from, but also the challenges that farmers face. The Rural Mental Health podcast that you are hosting right now, obviously you have a real personal connection to it. What was the drive behind that and what message do you hope to come from it?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, a good farming friend of mine, Michael Keel, died by suicide. In fact, he was a farmer but also a firefighter, and he used to train firefighters how to deal with agricultural issues. So if a cow got stuck in a ditch or a lorry turned over on the motorway and there were sheep everywhere, how the firefighters would deal with that. And so through my work with Countryfile, we actually filmed with him as well. And so I met him when he went for the job on Countryfile that I went for all those years ago. Got to know him through that, and then through his firefighting and through farming, and we became good friends. And he had a divorce, and that was difficult for him, but that was solved, and he had a gorgeous new girlfriend. And sadly, for some reason, I don't know whether it was a financial pressure or what it was, he decided to take his own life. And for me, that was an incredible shock, and for all his friends and family, obviously devastating. But then from that, a number of years later, on Countryfile, I was doing reports on mental health in the countryside. I met a young woman who talked about how she got close to taking her own life, and I was reading it in the Farmer's Guardian and other agricultural press about the statistics. So I thought maybe we should try and do something about it. And so we use a guy called Tim Thurston with our Cotswold Farm Park Tourist Enterprise, with all our managers, with some team coaching. And part of his business produces videos for people who mainly sat at desks, so county councils or National Rail or those sorts of people, and for mental health, to help with a better well-being in the workplace. And so I was chatting to him about it, and he said, well, why don't you produce some podcasts for farmers? We'll try and make it so it's accessible and speaking their language, farmers talking to farmers, and we'll get it out there. But I would need to raise the funds to help pay his company to do it, although he did it at a very good discounted price. And so that's where it all started. That was the conception of the idea. It took us about a year to get it off the ground, but now we have produced 15 podcasts.
In terms of rural mental health, within the industry we all know it's an issue, but trying to reach out to that wider audience, the general public that aren't from a farming background, how do we connect with them and really try and get them to support the issue?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid and very valuable point. And interestingly, the podcast that we created, we called it Adam Henson's Keeping on Track. So the keeping on track is trying to keep farmers on the right line, really. So if farmers are in a really desperate situation, then of course they need to go to their GP, and there's loads of other charities out there helping with mental health and other issues in agriculture. And for me doing it and putting my name to it, what it has helped do, because I'm on the telly, it opens doors. It allows me to get to speak to people like you, and you promote it, and also on radio stations and other coffee table magazines. And interestingly, one of the writers for one of the magazines that I was speaking to had listened to the podcast, and she said the general public should be listening to this. This is about them understanding the pressure that farmers are under. And I hadn't really thought of it like that before. And you're absolutely right. You know, we've got all these pressures that we know about: isolation, the weather, things outside our control, taking on family farms and that legacy that you're having to carry on your shoulders, all the things that we know about. But the consumer is often sniping the farmer. There's this, you're killing the planet, you're environmentally damaging.
And that's what I was going to touch upon in terms of that narrative right now around agriculture and farming, and you know, that disconnect with the general public isn't really helping a farmer's mindset.
I think it's got to happen. We have to be more closely connected to the consumer. I think over the years we've been able to produce food, we've been supported by the government through that. And not to say that we've been sitting on our laurels, but we haven't had to communicate to the consumer. And I think the modern day farmer of today's age are much better at communicating it on social media, through magazines, on the radio, and then you look at all the farming programs on television and Amazon and Clarkson's Farm and all those sorts of things. It's happening because the consumer is interested, and I think we have to build that more and more and more. But the consumer is so far left behind that they've lost the idea of what happens in agriculture. They don't understand the scale, the technology, the work that goes into it, and the pressure. And so we need to build that. Of course, with social media, they have the opportunity, those people who want to do it, to diss the farmer and to be quite mean and quite cruel, which is horrible, but that's the dark side of social media, not just for agriculture, for life in whole, you know, people being bullied at school and all those sorts of things. So we're never going to get away from it, but we have to use it as a tool for our benefit.
And that was a point that I was going to pick up on in terms of social media as this communication tool. And you know, it's the good and the bad of social media, really. You know, farmers are on there and they're sharing their story, but at the same time there is that negative aspect of it, and it does take its toll on people's mental health.
Yes, absolutely it does. And I think we need to be really aware of that. And I think if people in the wider community across the country, you know, the consumer, were to listen to the podcast series, but also to read some more agricultural press, or for it to be put on television more, you know, we've covered it on Countryfile and on other programmes, then maybe they would understand the amount of energy and effort and pressure that farmers are under to produce really good quality food. And in this country, we have amazingly tight legislation. We've got all the paperwork to fill in. We have to look after the environment. We manage our inputs and our outputs.
There's pressures in all directions.
Of course there is. You know, our human rights, human law, you know, employment law, and then animal welfare, of course. All these things to produce fantastic food for the British consumer, but they don't understand often where that food comes from. And so that is difficult.
In terms of how you cope with your own mental health, is there specifically some activities that you do or strategies, and is there a place on the farm where you like to go just when things get a little bit too much?
Yeah, so there's some beautiful parts of the farm. We've got a lovely place called the Gorse Valley, which has got gorse that flowers all year round, and then obviously coming in with the animals. So that cow over there, Strawberry, is just really quiet and friendly and lovely. She's a dairy shorthorn, and you can just go and sit by her and stroke her and have a little chat.
There's that trend now where you can cuddle a cow.
Cuddle a cow, and it is a
like
thing.
A cuddling cow,
I think animals are a great, you know, sounding board or somewhere that they don't answer back, do they? And dogs, particularly for me, are something that brings a smile on my face. So I've got 3 dogs in the house and a border collie outside, and I love spending time with them. So those things matter to me and help me. I've got an incredibly supportive wife and family, brilliant business partner, amazing managers on the farm, and a really solid bunch of friends. And I think having produced the podcast series and heard the stories from students, farmers, agricultural lecturers, all of these people who are giving us their sort of testimonials of the problems that they've been through, the overriding fact in all of them is the ability to speak out and have the courage to talk about your problems. You know, if you've got a broken arm, it's obvious. If you've got a broken head, it's not obvious. And, you know, I know you've done an article with Nigel Owens, and he went through some problems himself. And I remember speaking to him, and he said, people think that it's a sign of weakness to show your vulnerability. Actually, that's a sign of strength, and that's really important. And so, in work now, and with my mates and with my family, one of the tips I've learned is to say to someone, how are you feeling today? Yeah. And often people will say, oh, I'm fine. And then you say, out of 10? And then you have to think about it. Yeah, it's that follow-up. And if you say, how are you out of 10? Well, how am I out of 10? Well, maybe I'm a 6. Why a 6? What's up then? What's going wrong? And then it opens that conversation. And I think that's really important, that we give each other a bit of time.
I think also farming needs to remember that we are a big community, and sometimes that gets lost, yes. Particularly at the moment when there is just so much pressure
going on and so many challenges to deal with, I think sometimes we lose that community focus, and actually we're so much stronger when we're all supportive and like working together collectively towards different goals, whether that's, you know, towards climate change or towards animal health and welfare. Do you know what I mean? There needs to be that community feel back again.
There really does, and I think, you know, look at the scale of this farm. We're a 1,600 acre tenancy, and we've got 2 working on the arable and 2 working on the livestock. And you know, in the old days that would have been 50 people. And so it's an isolated, quite lonely job at times, spending hours and hours in a machine or out in the fields not seeing anybody, people living and working in remote areas across the UK. And we do need that community spirit. I mean, the markets help, you know, and they've now often got community centres and health centres in them.
I think those markets are critical to that kind of ability to open up to people, and I think it would be such a shame if we see a decline of livestock markets, because they are so important.
Absolutely, and you get farmers who go there who can speak to other farmers. They share their problems. They realise, actually, you know, that farmer's got the same difficulty as me. I'm not alone. I'm not just getting it wrong. And because they speak the same language, you know, they can share their thoughts and ideas. If you're a farmer that just goes, I don't know, to the shops or out to dinner parties, people might not have a clue what you're talking about, and you might not want to share that with them. In the UK now, I think one of the major problems we have is the education of young people, of people of all ages really, understanding what happens and where their food comes from. So a few years ago I took some sheep to a school in the north of Birmingham, a fairly deprived area. Very mixed community, a lot of Asian families there, and I took some sheep onto the stage in an assembly because we were talking about food provenance, and the headmaster said I brought in extra staff and less students because we might have problems. And I said, why problems? And he said, we might have a bit of a riot because a lot of these kids will have never seen a sheep before. At the Cotswold Farm Park, where we do potato digging, we'd sort of pick your own potatoes. I had some young women come onto the potato patch. I gave them a bag and a wheelbarrow and a fork, and I said, the potatoes are out there, it's part of the free ticket when you get in. And they went out onto the potato patch and they were going, where are they? And I said, you've got to dig. And so they got a fork and started digging and found one, and this young woman went down on one knee and said, I've got one! Which is sort of funny, but also quite sad in a way. And that there is this huge disconnect, and that has to come back to education. Why haven't we got a GCSE in agriculture, land use and conservation? We learn about history, religion, we don't learn about where our food comes from. And so how can that consumer, that person that lives in a tower block in Coventry, understand what we do on the land?
No, I think education is critical. You mentioned about young people there, and young people's mental health, particularly in the rural community, is something that, you know, is a real focus right now, because you know, they are the next generation of our industry, and you know, we really need to look after them and make sure that they are ready for the challenges ahead, but also, you know, that they're excited to be part of farming, and such a great industry that it is. And I just wondered, in terms of whether you think there has been this kind of change in approach with young people towards mental health.
Yes, I mean, certainly the agricultural universities and colleges are doing a huge amount of work. So Harper Adams, Hartbury College and University, the Royal Agricultural University all supported the podcast, and I know they're doing lots of work within the colleges, and that is so important. It's a focus in schools, and so it's something, thankfully, as a nation, we're talking about much more. And so I think the work is being done, but there is more to be done at the same time.
And hopefully that would kind of have a bit of a ripple effect, let's say, in terms of when you're working on a family farm, to provide that support to the wider network of working on the farm, particularly that older generation, because I think there is still that stigma there, unfortunately, and with that older generation of farmers wanting to kind of share how they're feeling.
Yeah, sure. And I think there is a bit of a, you know, you've got to dig deep and get on with it.
Yes.
Still.
And I think our industry, you know, that's something that actually farmers are quite proud of in a way, but it's a balance, isn't it? Because they're proud of that, you know, we grim and bear this horrible weather, but we crack on. That's something that actually is something to be proud of at the same time, but there is a balance.
Of course, and you've got to find that balance, and we have to I think we have to change our mindset in some degree. I know one of the people on the podcast, you know, talked about his experience going out on work experience from university, and he was put in a mobile home. He was working 15 hours a day, and it was in the middle of nowhere. His car was broken down, and he was in a sorry old state. And the farmer shouldn't have got him in that position.
No.
You know, that should have been recognised. And I know the universities now and colleges are being much more caring and nurturing of students that they just send out into the countryside and onto farms. But you know, we don't get it right all the time. No. You know, there's a lot of difficult situations out there. But you're absolutely right. As a community, as a farming community, as agriculture as a whole, which is an incredibly vibrant, exciting, technological, business-minded industry to be in, we should be at the forefront of success in this field as well as all the others.
And I think people have criticised quite recently there's too much focus on the doom and gloom, and actually, like you say, we should be celebrating what a fantastic, positive industry it is to work in, and a really exciting point in time for this industry as we go on this climate change journey.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, you know, through our use of the land, you know, what we can do to alleviate some of the climate change problems, there's a huge opportunity. The government are changing their direction, perhaps, rightly or wrongly, in the way we manage our farms. But yes, the technology is extraordinary, isn't it? You know, satellite-guided machines, robots that can milk cows and pick strawberries. Yeah. Huge farms or even small-scale farms with a niche market or a large market making serious money. If you look at the agricultural food supply chain and you asked any student what they were interested in, you could drop them into some very rewarding careers in that world. And so there's lots of opportunity out there, and I do still think that it's the best job in the world. But when there's so many accidents that are fatal, and when there are so many difficult situations where people are struggling with their mental health and taking their own lives, that's quite difficult to say, come on, farming's brilliant, and we've got to sort that out. But it almost
gives you that drive, doesn't it? And I guess that's what's given you that drive with the podcast, is like, we've got to at least do something, you know, and really, really try and connect here with the people that are struggling, and, you know, really try and change this mindset within the industry.
Indeed, and you know, the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institution, the DPJ Foundation in Wales, the Farm Community Network, Samaritans, you know, they're all doing an amazing work, NFU with the Yellow Wellies. So there's loads of organisations trying to help, and I hope, you know, collectively everyone is making a massive difference. But there's still lots of work to be done, and if we can get that farming community coming together and the wider community as a country to feel very passionate and proud of what we produce and the way we manage our landscape, and be sympathetic to some of the ways that sometimes we get it wrong or that aren't quite right, or we're on a journey to improve, it would be so good.
Yeah, it does feel at the moment that we're kind of just a bit polarised when it becomes debates and discussions, and we need to come together, particularly on social media.
Well, the part of the problem is sometimes with the journalists, with the media, is that an exciting thing to watch that they feel in the papers or on the telly or on radio, whatever, is two polarised positions that are absolutely, whatever either one says, they're never going to change. Yeah. But I think we all need to be much more open-minded and listen to someone else's argument.
Yes. Because that's how we learn, essentially.
Of course it is.
Through discussion and debate. That healthy debate and discussion is so critical.
So the vegan, vegetarian, meat eater argument is a big one. Yeah. And my wife's a vegetarian, and so is my daughter. My son's a big meat eater, and so am I. Yeah. And so we have really grown-up conversations about it. And I think that's so important. And so if I came out here
and
it's
busy at dinner time for you guys, how do you cook different?
Yeah, so we do cook different food at times, or sometimes I'll just eat vegetarian food, which is fine. Yeah. But if my wife came out here and these cows were up to their bellies in mud, in muck, she would say, that's no way to keep animals, that's not right. And I think, no, you're correct. Yeah. And I need pulling up on that. And we need someone advising and helping and guiding us sometimes, and to recognise things that are going wrong at times. So, but also for those people who are vegetarians and vegans, they need to consider why, I'm going off tack a bit here, but why are they in that position? It might be for health reasons, of course, essential. Yeah. It might be for animal welfare reasons, and if you don't want to kill animals or use their products, then that's absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned. But the one thing that really gets my beef up, poor choice of words, is for climatic reasons.
Yes.
You
And
know,
I
and
think
if-
that's a frustration that all farmers
And
have right now.
I'm,
But it goes back to communication and getting that voice and that discussion, that balanced discussion out there.
education. If you learnt it as a child,
Yes.
you would then be able to come from an informed base
Informed.
to criticise, communicate, and choose what you have on your plate.
Some really interesting points there. We've kind of touched upon it already, but that kind of wider influence on rural mental health. So in terms of, we need to ensure that the industry is working in a great way to protect people's mental health. So, you know, policy, agricultural policy, investment and funding, they all need to be in a good position to ensure that our community is protected in a way.
Yes, I think you are right. How that can come from government, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
I think often we look to government and say, come on, you need to help us with this, but we need to do it from within the industry.
Yes.
And so the colleges and universities are doing a great job. If we had it in school as well, that would help. The markets, the charities are all doing great work. So I'm not sure what the solution is. I think your point is very, very valid, but what the solution is, I'm not entirely
Because there are
sure.
so many factors. You know, we can talk about bovine TB. We all know that is a huge factor for rural mental health in terms of a farmer's mental health. If you go down with TB, a breakdown is really, really damaging. And you know, that then trickles down to policy. And it's just an interesting conversation really in terms of whether we can get policy right, whether that would have any direct impact on rural mental health. Do you think there is an argument for more bespoke rural mental health services?
Yes, there is, but there isn't the resources to provide it. You know, whatever your ailment may be, you know, you're lucky if you get a phone call from the doctor, aren't you? You know, we don't have the resources. I think there are so many different aspects in politics at the moment, and the need for this country to have more money in, you know, whether that's education, whether it's our roads, whether it's, you know, whatever. The list is long, isn't it?
Yeah.
And rural mental health would be one of those things on the list. Yeah. And whether our government is looking at it, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. Going back to your podcast now, if you can give us a little bit of a flavour of the people coming up in your podcast, but also just why people should listen.
Yeah, so what it does in my mind, it has testimonials from young people and more mature farmers, lecturers, charities, medical experts, but these testimonials from the individuals are very powerful because you listen to the farming story, and as a farmer you can reflect on your own life and there'll be some synergy to what you've experienced, and it makes you realise actually, you know, you're not alone. There's hundreds, thousands of us who have gone through similar bits and pieces, and often then this individual who's, you know, telling us their story will talk about the positives and how they got through it and the help they got from charities. And so I think that's really, really important, because it isn't all about these are all the disastrous things that are happening in farming and which is why many people are suffering. It's what are the solutions? What can you do about it? How can you turn a corner? And that for me is the powerful part of it. And so we're going to produce another 10 next year, and what we'd like to move on to now is the much more wider sort of positive things of mental health and well-being. You know, sleep, exercise, nutrition, family time, relationships, all those things that we probably all need a bit of coaching on.
Oh, definitely.
And so yeah, so the next ones we'll sort of go in down that sort of corridor journey. But at the present podcasts are already working. The thousands of people have already listened to them, thankfully. And I've had two amazing bits of feedback. One from the Samaritans, who got in touch to say they'd been in touch with a medical expert who had been working with a farming family whose the husband was really suffering. And the medical expert had sat down and then listened to the podcast, because it's farmers talking to farmers, so they're using that language. and was a massive help, and that person had completely turned a corner. And then I was at an event just a few weeks ago, and a woman came up to me and gave me a hug and said, "You saved my husband's life," which was just incredible.
That's the feedback that you want.
Job done, you know, absolutely. And he was in a very, very difficult state, and she said he'd listened to the podcast and he was a changed man. And so that for me, well, it made me cry actually at the time, and it was just incredible. And so if we can save one life, which it sounds like we have, it's all worth it. And which is why, you know, all these other charities are doing such an amazing job. And by producing them, we didn't want to be stepping on toes. We didn't want to be taking anything away from anyone else. We just wanted to be adding another tool to the box.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously this time of year, coming up to Christmas, really dark, bleak mornings, the weather's not great. It's just that extra layer, isn't it, in terms of making the job a bit more challenging. And, you know, getting up in the morning, no one really wants to get up when it's slashing it down with rain. In terms of just advice, or just how you cope with the weather conditions, and how do you get that motivation to get up in the morning?
Yeah, I think it is really difficult. And, you know, whether you're working in an office or whether you're working out on a farm, you know, it's dark when you wake up, and we're stood here, it's cold, and it's not raining at the moment, but, you know, the work can be much more of a grind. As a farmer, you don't want a white Christmas. No, you know?
Definitely don't. Please, weather gods, not a white Christmas.
You don't want to be having to thaw out pipes or dig the sheep out of snowdrifts. And so my advice...
Pretty as it can be, though.
Exactly, as beautiful as it can be. I think we just need to be able to try and slow down, and we need to try and reflect and celebrate on the things that we have got. So go and give Strawberry the cow a cuddle, and just think about all the joyous things that are going on around you. But also, you know, getting a good night's sleep, eating well,
good night's sleep.
Having some
The
exercise.
amount of farmers that I know that do not go to bed early. Well, and I'm like, they live off 4 or 5 hours sleep.
Yeah, and the trouble is, and we'll often eat food just to fuel ourselves rather than thinking about our nutrition. We pay a nutritionist to advise us on what we put on our total measured ration for our cows, so that they're in perfect order. We probably don't know it ourselves, and we're living potentially off junk food and drinking energy drinks to keep going, which is, you know, unhealthy and not great in any shape or form.
No, I think that's really sound
advice.
I mean,
I don't want to get on my soapbox, but, you know, there's lots of ways that we can look after ourselves better.
And I think this time of year, like you say, is a time of reflection and you know, looking back on what's been achieved on the farm in that year, I think is so important.
Absolutely. You know, how well have you done? It may not be that brilliant, but, you know, it's the new start of a new year generally, a fresh start, and where we can get to in the future. But you're right, Christmas is often a time when we miss loved ones we've lost. There may be difficult times going on with people being ill or whatever it might be. And so it's sometimes a catalyst to feeling down and depressed. And so what we need to do, as you just quite rightly put, is flip that on its head and say, okay, what are the positives? Where are we going? What's exciting? What are we looking forward to? And you know, what are we going to achieve next year?
Well, if you've got these lot to hang around with, then perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for yours, and yeah, let's hope lots of people listen to the podcast and have a lovely Christmas and a wonderful New Year.